In 1996, a movie attempted to tackle a subject which hadn't before. It's a movie about a rather unusual profession, about a group of researchers embarking on road trip after road trip with the end goal of tracking down real, living, breathing monsters on the Great Plains of North America. Monsters of wind, born of storms, and pursued by a bunch of graduate students and their college professor. No, this is not a bait and switch, even though it's the perfect place for one. I am talking about Jan de Bont's Severe Weather Odyssey Twister. Although that may be a bit formal, Twister is undeniably a staple of 1990s disaster adventure cheese. It has lovably goofy characters, pre-2000s car chases, and an abundance of shots of the dismantling of anything and everything. It's an action movie, a Hollywood action movie, and it lives up to that to the fullest extent. Yet despite the camera sets and A-list actors, Twister is not 100% fiction. The general premise which binds the film is anything but. If you want to be unnecessarily profound, Twister is a tale of man, machine, and malevolent forces of nature. A 2-against-1 boss battle in which the boss can't be defeated, only understood. Until the sequel, but ignore that. This is a tale which has continuously been told in real life for over half a century now. In that time, meteorologists and engineers have constructed a vast arsenal of machines to study, monitor, and forecast tornadoes. Machines of wildly different functions and varying degrees of success. Some working from stations, others out in the field. It is here, out in the field, where Twister plants its roots, then dresses it up a bit with some CGI, a few explosions, some romantic drama, and finally meets you at the theater with it for a kick-ass evening. A simple formula for making a fun piece of cinema, and a proven one at that. 1998 gave us Celestial Impacts, 1997 volcanic eruptions, and in the same year as Twister, 2 alien invasions, albeit of wildly different tone. It's not hard to spot a trend here, but isn't it curious how 90s disaster flicks come in pairs, yet the film specifically about a natural hazard that actually does arrive with a twin on occasion doesn't? It would certainly be interesting, though, to see what a Twister doppelganger may have looked like. And wouldn't it be especially funny if, keeping with the 90s disaster movie trend, it was somehow, by some measure, more plausible, accurate, or faithful to what it's actually derived from? That would be funny, wouldn't it? Did you know that there are 104 feature-length films based on Marvel Comics? 104. 105, 106, 107, that was a dated statement the day it was written. Assuming an average runtime of 1 hour 40 minutes, you could spend an entire week of your life doing nothing but living and breathing Marvel movies. Or double that if you intend on sleeping. For DC films, it's even crazier, 126, 127, 128. It's best if you don't keep count. Clearly, the superhero genre is well stocked with film, and regardless of ratio of good to bad films within each, the fans of both subgenres have more than a healthy selection of options. For the disaster movie genre, it's a different story. Disaster subgenres are significantly more straightforward than their superhero counterparts. Earthquake, Shipwreck, Emmerich. And for each, with the notable exception of kaiju flicks, because Godzilla has some 8 films per era on average, it's pretty slim pickings. With any given one of these subgenres, you may only get 10 or so movies. Not 10 good movies, just 10 movies. And only a couple may have actual budgets. Suffice to say, it's rather underwhelming, and for the tornado movie enthusiast, it's just about as bleak. 2 blockbusters, a blockbuster sequel, an indie film, 2 handfuls of B-movies, a JPG thriller, so a Hallmark movie, and then way down at the bottom of the bargain bin, the gimmicks. You know what I'm talking about. Shit like Metal Tornado, Ice Twisters, Stone Nados, or the franchise everyone knows. There's even Alien Tornado. The gimmick films are really a bunch of nothing burger time suckers that at the very least get a laugh out of me, but besides that, their only real purpose for existing is to be part of YouTube disaster movie compilations, the ones with 2 Steps from Hell playing in the background. If you want any substance whatsoever in a tornado movie outside of the big 3 and Supercell, you're going to have to turn to the B-movies. Some are good, some are meh, and some have characters that were intentionally written to be the most insufferable people on planet Earth. But at the very least, there are some passable options, and one of them is the star of our program.
Nothing on Earth is more powerful.
On a scale of 1 to 10, this would be
15.
More terrifying.
Twister's coming!
All you can hear is that roar.
Or more deadly.
This is Tornado! Exclamation mark. An 89-minute made-for-TV movie which aired as the Fox Network's Tuesday night movie on May 7, 1996. Directed by Noel Nosek of King of the Mountain, and among the first movie credits for writer John Logan, who's written some actually amazing films like The Aviator, Rango, and my personal favorite of his, Star Trek Nemesis. No, I'm messing with you. It's the 2002 adaptation of The Time Machine, and that I'm not kidding about. This is Twister's counterpart, and while I'd like to say this is the Dante's Peak to Twister's Volcano, undeniably the budgets don't exactly line up. There's no getting around it. This is not some big blockbuster. This is a low-budget production aimed at TV viewers with nothing better to do on a particular night. Inherently, there isn't a lot of appeal to a movie like that, so the justification for investing in its creation often has to be something external. An established viewer interest. Interest in something else, such as an upcoming movie. Unfortunately for the film, its legacy was sealed on day one. This is a movie whose only means of turning a profit was banking on the hype generated by Twister, hence the not-so-subtly strategic release date. And this model of movie making was going to shape not only its promotional material, but its story and characters. The history of film has shown that money doesn't guarantee a good movie, but if this movie had garnered just a bit more backing on par with its contemporaries, it could have at least been something memorable. While Twister had Spielberg's Amblin at the helm with capital provided by both Warner Brothers and Universal, Tornado was tossed onto the lap of von Zernick-Sertner Films, a smaller studio formed in 1987 with significant financial backing provided by Hallmark Entertainment, which makes 2 Hallmark movies. In the end, the movie didn't do much. It aired a few times, it was watched a few times, then after a short while fell into obscurity. And for the few that do remember it, it is remembered not as Twister's counterpart, but ingloriously as some neutered clone of it. Less of a deep impact, more of a meteorite. But this is the sum of the surface analysis, the judgment of the movie based not on its content but of its purpose, context without substance. So given that, knowing what and how the movie did, what does it actually have to offer, is the title of Twister Ripoff warranted? Well, Tornado is a movie about a group of researchers going on road trip after road trip with the end goal of tracking down real living breathing monsters on the Great Plains of North America, the movie's namesake. Yeah, that's not very convincing. But it shouldn't be. What I just described isn't inherent to Tornado, but it isn't inherent to Twister either. What I just described is Vortex. What I described is the Tornado Intercept Project, the Neil Ward experiments, Trap, Taurus, Perils, and the list continues. What I described is research tornado chasing, and that is not a copyrighted work of Michael Crichton. That was his inspiration. So, while the intent of the producers to closely follow the premise of Twister may well indeed warrant calling Tornado a ripoff, completely writing the movie off purely based on the fact that its story is similar as some do isn't fair. It is a concept that did not begin with Twister, nor did it end with it, in real life or in theaters. So beyond the controversy of premise, that just leaves everything else in the movie. And it's probably here where I need to issue my disclaimer. I love this movie. I am very biased, for many reasons that even I myself cannot explain. This is my perfect background movie, which perhaps doesn't do Tornado any credit, but it's true. It's the movie you throw on a summer day with the windows open while you're playing a game. It's the movie you throw on while you're same-day forecasting for a local storm chase as the sky darkens. It's the movie you throw on at midnight while you fall down a rabbit hole of research. It's not Zemeckis, it's not Scorsese, it's not even Michael Bay. But it's a movie with charm, a certain dumb, comfortable quality that I can't put my finger on, nor do I really want to at the risk of ruining it. Do I like this movie as much as Twister? No. but I don't like anything as much as Twister. Bottom line is, I enjoy it. Despite my preference, though, I'm nonetheless aware that this movie isn't for everyone, and you don't need to endure much runtime to see why. The pace drags. It's a slow burn. Diesel. Crude oil. To put it simply, suppose you were to take the steak and egg scene from Twister. Great scene, lively, sandwiched in between a bunch of action and gives the viewer a little breather from it all. Now take that same scene, make it a bit more awkward, replace a quarter of the characters with those of complete inconsequence, and then copy and paste the scene 5 times. Just change the setting and topics of discussion. All this in a movie with 23% less runtime, so you can imagine what gets cut out. Beyond an opening scene with characters that are not heard or seen from again, the first half of this movie has no actual tornado sequences. A chase sequence, yes, and a decently fun one at that, but one that comes up dry in the end. Tornado is a lot of talk, exposition, meteorological talk, and attempted character development. It's not actually bad, and as a result the film does a sufficient job at making several of its characters real people. And I'll take any chance I can get to listen to weather talk, no matter how basic, incomplete, or even wrong. But all of this is still at the cost of a slow movie, particularly when compared to Twister, which is non-stop action, climbing the Vegeta scale, persistently trying to one-up itself. On the face of it, this isn't terrible. Plenty of movies out there are slow-paced, but in the end are worth it. The question you should be asking yourself is, does all this time waiting around pay off? And the answer is, I'm not going to sit here and dance around on the grave of a post-production company that was bought out literally a year after this film was made, especially when it has ties to a modest list of films, a certain volcano movie included. But to tell it how it is, Twister had a bigger budget, and all that cash got it industrial light and magic. You know, ILM, the wizards behind some of the single greatest visual effects of the past 50 years. The company that pushed volumetric CGI to the limit for some campy disaster movie, churning out damn decent condensation funnels that at their worst are okay, and at their best are some of the greatest tornadoes in cinema since The Wizard of Oz. And then they came back 30 years later and did it again. For Tornado, on the other hand, Hollywood Digital managed to squeeze out 2 visible tornado sequences, which, while I'm sure look passable on the washed-out screens of a dying CRT, on a modern screen in full detail they look like this. These look like they were plucked out of Gary's mod. Or at least that's what I would say if Gary's mod tornadoes weren't somehow infinitely superior to them. These are about as convincing as the wound-up blankets I used for tornadoes in my childhood home movies. And that's a real shame considering the illustrated tornado on the original release cover actually looks really cool. For a Twister supposedly striking the Texas Panhandle in the mid-1990s, it looks the part. You could compare it to a number of tornadoes. Pampa, Dimmitt, Miami, 94, not 97. Very beautiful tornado, really needs a movie cover of its own. What Tornado provides instead, however, are Twisters clearly trying to be this illustration, but so much detail gets washed out that they just become black masses with feathered edges. It's funny, because the most realistic tornadoes in the movie end up being those from the licensed pieces of tornado film and video it makes use of. Real tornadoes captured during the golden age of tornado media that the movie uses to lightly expound the Vegeta scale, and some pretty exceptional choices at that. So out of all the various aspects of a motion picture, especially an action-adventure motion picture, these are 2 pretty substantial knocks against it. One preferential and one objective. That is quite a bit of negative for a movie I supposedly like, so there must be something decent about it. Well, there are 3 that stand out to me, 1 objective and 2 preferential. In fact, the first of these is so preferential that it may just be the one aspect of any movie that is most judged by the personal taste of the viewer. Tornado's original soundtrack was crafted by orchestral composer Gary Schyman. If you know him at all, it's most likely going to be for his grand and unsettling work on BioShock. Before his video game symphonics, however, Schyman began his career in television, lending his early talents to the likes of Tom Selleck's Mustache, The A-Team, and Tales of the Gold Monkey, a show about a Grumman floatplane pilot who gets into hijinks with his one-eyed dog against Nazi spies out in the Pacific. Which sounds awesome, to be honest. In the mid-90s, Schyman was contracted for Tornado among his final television projects, and what he presented was certainly up to par. Some sections of the tracks are fairly standard 90s TV music, with several cues fitting the expectations that come with it. But in many of the tracks, Schyman makes excellent use of trumpets and strings to create a score which is surprisingly ambient and genuinely ominous at points. A score that, in the end, feels a bit bigger than the movie it resides in. Now, you could point your finger and say this isn't Mark Mancina with that flair of Van Halen, and yeah, I'll concede that. But what Schyman has crafted here is nonetheless good music, and I will always take up an opportunity to show off good music. I'm sorry, I really like those violins. But equally as substantial as the VFX and score, aspect number 2. Among the first things that stand out about Tornado is its surprisingly stellar roster of actors. Typically, a movie like this is packed with a bunch of people you've never heard of and probably won't again. Instead, Tornado got its hands on quite the interesting lot, and ultimately this really helps in lessening the lows of the movie's writing and amplifying its high notes. Rip-off is going to be a hard word to shake in this particular case, however, and the keen eye may notice a number of similarities between the characters of Tornado and those in Twister. But Tornado's roster isn't an exact copy and paste, it's more of a blended version, as if someone took the cast of Twister and jumbled up their individual character traits to create a cast which is similar, but definitely not the same. That is with almost one exception. That would be the character of Richie Cochran, played by Charles Homais. Richie is the closest thing to a human antagonist this movie provides, an egotistical, stuck-up asshole TV weather reporter out of Amarillo, Texas. For all intents and purposes, he is this movie's Jonas Miller. I call him Miller Lite, but Richie manages to up the ante and act even more like a cartoonish schoolyard bully. Ironically, though, these dramatics are actually very becoming of Homais, considering his background in theater. I say Richie is almost an exception, however, because unlike Jonas, he actually has somewhat of a character arc, stepping up to the plate when it matters most, putting his pride and career aside to actually help people during the film's climax. You may consider that campy, but hey, it's more than can be said for Jonas, who acts like an ass the whole movie and then explodes. It's also a prime example of what I mean when I say jumbled character traits. Richie, the jerk-off antagonist who maligns storm chasers and their practices, works in broadcast. The profession Bill Harding in Twister was going to enter and is maligned for by Jonas, a professional storm chaser. Maybe you can see now why comparing these two films is almost as fun as watching them. Maybe even as fun. Among the other more prominent cast members, Carrie Boren and Bo Eason play a pair of walking, talking Texas stereotypes, and I absolutely love it. Eason's character is literally named Tex, which the movie self-consciously makes fun of.
I don't believe I've ever met anyone named Tex before.
Well, the truth is, I'm originally from North Carolina.
Maybe they ought to call you Carol.
Tex would do just fine, ma'am.
The two have a decent amount of chemistry, and Tex ranges from the goofy to the dramatically serious, the former being quite funny and the latter fairly forced. Although Tex makes up for any of that by driving this badass black and red Chevy K10 around. Outside of dialogue, the pair are really just there to be part of the team, and don't amount to much during the film besides being eyes on the ground. Much like Aaron Isbicki as Oliver, the meteorology grad student. You may know Isbicki as this guy from the Vietnam sequence of Forrest Gump, which also had a Tex in it.
Well, I don't remember where Tex come from.
I'm originally from North Carolina.
You know, now that I think about it, Eason is also familiar. Vaguely, but I'm positive I've seen him elsewhere. Let's take a look.
Holy Jesus.
A step up on the ladder of character importance is L.Q. Jones playing Grandpa Ephraim Thorne, which is an awesome name. And in the world of man, machine, and those malevolent forces of nature, Ephraim is 100% man. Thousands of years of human instinct in regards to weather prediction has found its way into this old vindictive cowboy. Past trauma has placed one hell of a chip on his shoulder, resulting in a man who has sharpened his wits and molded his gut to combat the death wrought by tornadoes. He's Joe and Aunt Meg rolled into one, but with his own skeptical twist. He trusts himself, his own experience. He doesn't trust the machine, sometimes to a fault. He serves as a mentor, a voice of wisdom, but is also himself forced to learn from a world of innovation that is combating that loss of life adjacent to him. In the end, this gives us one of the best characters of the movie, some could even argue the best, who is a relatively simple but effective character growth with a decent payoff in the end. Is it rushed at times? Yes. Is every line a home run? No. But there are moments where L.Q. Jones delivers some surprisingly powerful dialogue, so much so that it almost feels out of place in the movie.
That was the last I ever saw her. I was 5 years old when that monster came and ate my world. And now it's coming again.
Shannon Sturgis plays the first of what can be considered the movie's three protagonists. Samantha Callan, a federal bureaucrat sent by Washington to destroy tornado research as we know it, or something like that. No, she's an auditor, sent to determine whether the plot of the movie deserves to have its National Science Foundation lifeline cut or energized. Callan is a mixed bag character. Sturgis has no issue coming across as charismatic when given the chance, but then 2 scenes down the road the movie gets going and awkwardly shuffles her aside like desk clutter so it could work. There are points where she literally just stands around amongst the crowd, looking around, seemingly talking to the ether. Yeah, she's this movie's Melissa, but to the character's credit, we do learn more about her as an individual beyond just her profession. And at least she carries some strings to the plot as opposed to just being a living metaphor for a comfortable lifestyle. It's just that portion of the plot she is carrying, it doesn't necessarily have to be her. The movie could theoretically replace her with faceless memos from Washington and the core of the story would remain. With several other characters that wouldn't be possible. Honestly, that's a shame, because in the end that means we have a main character who's just sort of there to be there, whose only real unique impact on the story is forwarding the romantic subplot, being the love interest to Bruce Campbell. Speaking of which, Bruce Campbell is in the movie, and he is probably the single biggest draw to the film outside of the tornadoes. But unlike those, he doesn't disappoint. If you've seen Campbell before, you know what to expect. Always has a quip in his back pocket, some sarcastic comment ready to run it through that nasally Michigan voice of his. He's fun. A lot of fun, like in most things he's in. Maybe a little toned down this time around, and if anyone doesn't actually give a shit about the role, something tells me it's him.
What do I believe is the better movie, Tornado or Alien Apocalypse? Which of your shitty movies was shittier?
But the fundamentals haven't gone, that snappiness he's got is still definitely there. Actually, what's especially amusing is that Campbell's role in this movie makes for a pretty good I'd have 2 nickels but it's weird that it happened twice moment, considering this is the first of 2 severe weather-themed movies he has starred in. If you know, you know, but instead of playing a psychotic mayor, in Tornado he is Jake Thorne, a rough-around-the-edges hobbyist storm chaser and grad school dropout who bums around the Texas Panhandle in his Suburban, hunting tornadoes and avoiding women much to Ephraim's dismay. There's not a whole lot to analyze with his character outside of acknowledging that Jake is what ultimately holds this movie together, the link between characters, places, and plot points, and ironically also what is probably holding the audience to the movie. He doesn't drastically change by the end, he just becomes slightly less reclusive, but the movie fleshes out his character enough to where he's a real human being, or as real as you can make Bruce Campbell anyway. He's the movie's centerpiece, the one you root for, the one you follow, the one you give your attention to, and no one can blame you for it. Yet despite this, and the undeniable entertainment Campbell lugs around with him, he's not my favorite. You may be inclined to think it's L.Q. Jones, and good guess, but no. No. My favorite would be the other Michigander. Ernie Hudson is someone who doesn't nearly get the love he is owed, which seems to always be a fault of circumstance. He's either fantastic in a great movie but slightly overshadowed by his peers, or he's the best part of a poor movie that most choose to forget.
Congratulations, you just made Congo!
Or you just don't realize it's him until it clicks years later. He's a master at playing the straight man in the face of craziness, waltzing through Wonderland with that little bit of normalcy trailing behind him, and he does it to impeccable comedic effect. In Tornado, however, he brings a slightly different dynamic. Meet Joe Harding, Black, Branson, Joe Branson, Dr. B, the movie's resident scientist, and basically the catalyst for everything that transpires. Branson is the foil to Ephraim, and in more ways than are immediately obvious. Similarly, he is a veteran of the wild world of weather with supposed years of experience under his belt, yet in a drastically different way. The doctor of meteorology from St. Louis, Missouri,
Branson, Missouri,
has placed himself at the forefront of an industry charging ahead, and he is ready to be the spearhead that makes the breakthrough. He's an innovator, an engineer, looking to beat gut and instinct with steel and wires, not to replace it, but to give those without a fighting chance. Branson has put more than just his trust in the machine, it's his life's work. He's obsessive, but unlike Ephraim, who buries his obsession behind dramatic stares and cold remarks, he's flippity, like a little kid whose parents are taking him to get ice cream and he can't contain his excitement. He ranges from the confused and awkward to Hudson's own little brand of charisma, not sharp and cool like Campbell, but welcoming, congenial. The atmosphere of the movie, however, adds extra layers on top of that. Branson speaks with a cautious formality, always on the edge that what he has built is about to be kicked to the wayside. He's desperate, that's why he's out in Texas seeking the instincts of Jake and Ephraim, which he doesn't fully possess. And by the end of the movie, when it finally comes time to test him and his machine, that desperation becomes urgency, downright panic, that, of all people, Ephraim finally quells. I could be reading too much into it, someone will undoubtedly tell me so, but I can't help but thoroughly enjoy the dynamic this movie crafts between Branson and Ephraim, and their interactions are among my favorite parts of the movie. Two men at odds, wise in their own ways, right and wrong in their own ways, clashing yet teaching each other, and by the end, both of them learn to appreciate the other side. It's such a simple little thing, really, but it's one of the few good things in this movie I can point to that effectively sets it apart from Twister. A basic, non-combative little dispute over some doodad built for tornado research. Of course, this is about as preferential as the music, but I genuinely think that these high points of character interaction and the actor's portrayal of them outweigh the general subpar nature of the writing. That is my preference. Which just leaves the objective aspect of the movie. Although outside of its technical aspects, its VFX, sound design, and composition, what else could be objective? Well, despite being so prominent in the movie and so integral to its story, it's ironically one you would probably never think much about. After all, who's going to think much about a doodad built for tornado research?
Hey, what's this gizmo in my shed?
Well, it's time to meet the guests of honor. This is Patty.
And the movie knows it.
Well, looks aren't everything. I'm sure she's got a terrific personality.
Say hello to the device of the hour, the portable analyzer of technical tornado information. Patty. Bit of a goofy name, don't you think?
It's also my wife's name.
Oh. But what is Patty? What does it do? And how is this orange waste bin supposed to forward the meteorologist's understanding of a tornado? Well, as you can imagine, gaining information on a tornado is not as straightforward as measuring, say, a plank of wood. You can't just walk up to one, or at least you can't walk up to one without dismissing serious risks. Risks like winds that can toss a semi-truck, and said semi-truck hurtling at you. This naturally presents some complications, and unfortunately even today as supercomputer simulations of tornadoes are still a developing art, analysis of real physical tornadoes out in nature remains the most concrete way to obtain information. So, that leaves 3 tried and true ways to gain data on a tornado. The first of these is via direct observation, what we can see. This could be the clues a tornado leaves behind, the damage it creates, or it could be through photogrammetry, dissecting film, video, and images of a tornado to discern how they and objects inside them are moving. The limitations of this is that not every variable of the atmosphere is visible to the human eye, and the ones that are yield only estimations at best with sometimes massive margins of error. It's imprecise, but that's why we have radar. The impressiveness of radar stems from the fact that it essentially allows for direct interaction with a tornado or its parent supercell while it's in progress. You can't send a person in there, so why not send a photon? Or a few septillion. Let them bounce back, feed them into a receiver, let a computer think it over, and wham, there you go, solid data on the fly from a safe distance. But although it is significantly more precise than, say, photogrammetry, it too has its limitations. Radar cannot measure everything. A modern dual-pole Doppler radar can give information on precipitation intensity, velocity, and uniformity, its shape. It cannot directly tell you temperature, pressure, humidity, or anything about particles that don't return a radar echo for that matter. There's also the issue of line of sight. A radar cannot scan through trees or buildings, and crucially, because of ground clutter, radar really struggles to scan the lowest levels of a tornado. What to do about that? Well, if precise data points are desired, it's too dangerous to directly send a person, and the photon either gets blocked or lost. You could always send in a machine. Some doodad. This is Patty, the valiant in-situ tornado probe, a ruggedized machine purpose-built to weather the conditions we simply cannot. Patty is fictional, but the concept is anything but. The tornado probe has braved the atmosphere's most violent environments for decades now. It has come in many shapes, sizes, configurations, with varying degrees of instrumentation, effectiveness, and, well, usefulness. Whether or not each individual design actually has a practical point to its existence, though, they all share the same general goal: go where we can't to measure what we can't. Patty, real or not, is one such design. Yet even among the masses, it has its own unique attributes. The basics first, though. The core of PADI is a cylindrical drum around 2 feet, 0.6 meters in diameter. A rounded shroud covers the instrument array, with 4 ports in the shroud exposing the instruments to the ambient atmosphere outside. The instruments on board PADI, however, are interesting in their own right. Explicitly, Oliver, grad student extraordinaire, claims PADI carries a digital barometer for pressure measurements and an electropotentiometer, which, in the context of tornado research, is an overly fun way of saying a wind vane, or wind vane equivalent. From the labels on the array, we can also see that PADI has the means to measure wind speed. It's fair to assume PADI then measures at least the basics: pressure, temperature, humidity, and wind velocities. But none of that is what intrigues me. What intrigues me is what Oliver says in addition to those.
All the monitoring devices are housed here in the control shell. You have your digital barometer, your celiometer, your electropotentiometer.
But check out
your celiometer.
A celiometer is a LiDAR. If you don't know what that is, think radar, but instead of shooting out microwaves, it emits visible light. Not radio detection and ranging, but light detection and ranging. If that's still too much, it's a laser. LiDAR can be an incredibly versatile tool with many applications, but a celiometer is rather simple with one particular task: ranging of cloud base height. How high up are the clouds above? You know what that's good for? Traditionally, if you really wanted to know cloud base height, you'd get that in the form of the obtained lifting condensation level, LCL height, from a balloon sounding. But LCL is a huge generalization over a broad area and doesn't account for all the minute little nuances of an individual storm. A celiometer can tell you the exact cloud height for wherever it is at whatever the current moment and then log it. Well, it's funny to think you could go around using this for nothing more than measuring the height of various tornadoes for some trivial scorecard. LCL can actually be important when studying a tornado. Lower LCL heights mean a lower parent rotation, and the lower the mesocyclone is, the easier a time a growing tornadic vortex will have latching onto it. LCL heights are also directly correlated with a storm's inflow layer, which determines how much moisture, and thus energy, a storm is intaking. In addition, with a celiometer, a probe could tell you which parts of the storm it was under, the anvil, the storm base, the wall cloud, etc., and then correlate its other measurements with that relative position. This all means that the celiometer aboard PADI actually serves a somewhat practical purpose and isn't just some throwaway technobabble line they had Isbicki read for the sake of it. Or maybe it is, and they had no idea what they were talking about, but that's irrelevant. An accomplishment by accident doesn't nullify the accomplishment, it just makes it funny. Now, of course, there are still parts of PADI that leave me with questions. I have no idea where the hell the LiDAR beam is supposed to come out of, nor do I know why displays and gauges are required for instruments when you could just log the data. Not to mention, you can't even look at them while they're recording because A, the lid would have to be open, and B, you'd have to be in the tornado with it. And for the record, I still don't know what that antenna does. No clue. But those are some surprisingly nitpicky qualms for a disaster movie prop. Typically, I would expect several more that are many times as puzzling. Right off the bat, PADI is a rather competent machine, and what really sets it apart from the crowd has nothing to do with its instruments, in fact. Beating the wind comes with 2 prerequisites. For one, an object must be sturdy, strong enough to not be ripped apart, but equally as important is that an object must stay planted. If the wind gets a hold of you and carries you away, it doesn't matter if the wind itself can't destroy you, it'll let the ground and gravity do that. Is there a fix for this? Well, yeah, there's a few. The first and provenly most reliable is weight, or more so density. Limit the surface area of an object while increasing its mass. The greater the density of an object, the stronger the winds that are required to move it. Simple as that. Secondly is aerodynamics, the creation of surfaces that can deflect lifting winds, or even generate downforce, using the wind's own energy against itself to keep the object squeezed against the ground. The vast majority of in-situ tornado probes rely on one or both of these proven methods. PADI, however, opts for a third option. Density and weight can conquer the wind, but instead of making the object itself heavy, you could always just attach it to something heavy, like the Earth. PADI has an anchoring system. These 4 struts, or legs as described by Dr. Branson, that surround the device each contain a metal stake housed inside a titanium tube. Why titanium? Because it can cure cancer, I don't know. Movie myths about the supermetal titanium aside, these stakes can be driven into the ground by the deflagration of small explosives. Think of it like a really big powder-actuated nail gun, except the nail stays attached to the barrel. It sounds wacko on paper, and I don't know if the specific use of explosives to drive the bolts would fly with the bureaucrats, but the method of anchoring an object to the earth is also a valid method for combating tornadic winds. You don't see it much, if at all, on tornado probes, but it's quite common on tornado intercept vehicles, used in conjunction with a vehicle's typically substantial weight. Granted, it would be neglectful to not mention the caveats associated with tornado anchors. For one, it takes time. Even with explosive bolts that fire basically instantly, the movie demonstrates that Patty's explosives still need to be hooked up to their fuses as part of the device's deployment. It's not just press a button and kablam. It's not really a hindrance in the movie outside of a malfunction, but it would be on a real tornado chase. And contrary to what some may believe, anchoring to the ground is not some end-all be-all trump card to surviving a tornado. Tornadoes are no strangers to ripping anchored objects out of the ground on a regular basis, and the strongest of tornadoes have demonstrated the ability to carve small ravines out of the earth. Anchoring to the ground won't do much when the twister takes the ground. But those are the exception, and 2-foot stakes for something Patty's size would probably be sufficient for most applications, those being the vast majority of tornadoes Patty would actually encounter. That is at the cost of a longer setup time, but you are actually getting something for that cost. It's unorthodox, but the methodology of Patty could work. In the movie, it naturally does, bar the aforementioned malfunction of one of the legs, a malfunction which gives Ephraim his climactic end as man protects machine from the monster. That makes the climax sound epic, but trust me, most of it's even goofier than Twister. Craziness aside, Patty survives, ultimately succeeds in its data collection mission, and Dr. Branson vindicated with it. A happy ending, but what else would you expect? Or want? Patty is certainly one hell of an ironic case. Despite everything Tornado is as a movie, despite its goals, despite not delivering on a number of other points, the movie somehow managed to create a coherent, practical, and in some regards, a downright cleverly designed machine to center its story and characters around. And as a result, I would argue it is the best a Tornado movie has ever produced. Ever. The thing about being the best, though, and I mean to really, really be the best at something, without also being the worst, is that something else has to come second. And in Patty's case, its competition's a doozy.
I mistreat you, girl. Sure don't mean no harm. I mistreat you, girl.
Besides Paxton and Hunt, if I had to guess, there are 4 general things audiences remember about Twister. One of them is that cow. That stupid-ass cow. Actually, I'm certain there's a lot of people out there that only remember this movie for that joke. So many expletives, so little time. Another one is the great Philip Seymour Hoffman as Dusty, giving one of the goofiest and most energetic performances of a career which unfortunately was much shorter than it should have been. In Twister, he really steals the show at times, and no doubt is one of the best characters in the film, which is a high bar, and I won't hear it any other way. Third is that Dodge Ram, that unbreakable gleaming red extended cab pickup that many call product placement, while I prefer to think of it as the movie's third main character. It's the action star of the whole thing, it gets more abuse than anyone else in the movie, and it's a thing of beauty. But fourth is what's strapped to the back of the Dodge. And the Jeep, it'd be a sin to forget the Jeep. This is Dorothy, and look at that, it's also a trash can. Although this time, instead of looking like it'd be in your home, it looks like it'd be behind a gas station. It's a rough-looking thing. Rust everywhere, paint chipping on a cobbled-together frame, wires strung about, seemingly random junk bolted to it. It's a lot to take in. But don't let that fool you. Not for a second. Because the truth is, if Dorothy were to be deployed into a tornado, its goals accomplished, and everything functioning as intended, it would trigger one of the biggest scientific leaps forward in the history of tornado and severe storms meteorology. You think I'm joking? Look, Dorothy is remembered for many things. Its yellow and silver color scheme, those red rotating nav beacons, stock Hollywood sound effect, car alarm, rapid high PPE075001. Oh yeah, I looked it up. It has a name. But most of all, Dorothy is remembered for its signature quality, one that makes it especially unique. Dorothy, like Patty, is an in-situ device, a machine built to return information from inside a tornado, and the brainchild of one of our main characters in the movie. But that's about the limit of the similarities. The bulk of Dorothy is a large, hollow canister seated inside a skeletal frame. Along the frame, various instruments are strung: a pair of wind monitors, probes for temperature and pressure, a few cameras, a GPS receiver, and this thing. We'll come back to this thing. However, the most important immediate difference between these two machines, other than size, is that Dorothy is not a single in-situ probe. And obviously I don't just say that because there were 4 of them plus one post-1996. Dorothy is a trash can that actually holds something. Beneath a pivoting plastic lid in the gut of the canister sit these small spherical meteorological sensors, although it would be more apt to call these things self-contained weather stations. Each of these sensors is its very own tornado probe, able to observe the basic parameters of the atmosphere, and the kicker is that there aren't just a couple or even a dozen of them. There are hundreds. When these sensors are exposed to the tornado, they don't just sit on the ground as Patty does. Their purpose is to fill the vortex, all the while transmitting back a plethora of information. Basically the whole 9 yards we're used to by this point. And this does explicitly include wind velocities, as stated by Bill in his expository spiel. I only emphasize that because the sequel tried to retcon it. Presumably because Dorothy is a modern marvel of science and they couldn't one-up it otherwise. That should really say something about this tin can. It was so good, they had to nerf it. The deployment of Dorothy, like many things, is straightforward on paper. Something of its size is naturally going to be a bit more unwieldy than something like Patty, compounded by the fact that Patty had a pair of boards to hook onto so you could carry it around like the Ark of the Covenant. But for its size, Dorothy is shown to be not too heavy, and a 2-person team is sufficient for getting it unlatched and on the ground. Beyond that, the deployment process is actually much simpler than Patty. Turn it on, turn the nav beacons on, adjust the lenses on the cameras, switch the lid to automatic, and run away. From there, the canister dispatches its sensor cluster upon entering the tornado, which in turn transmit their data to an on-site receiving station before being discarded or destroyed along with, eventually, the canister itself. Each Dorothy is therefore a one-off, but it's a bit hard not to be when the principal design characteristic of your machine is literally to become airborne debris. Nonetheless, the transmission of data back from the tornado is ultimately what makes the deployment successful. But like I said, this is paper, and lucky for the viewer, even the fictional world of a movie isn't just paper. Something both Tornado and Twister share, and both do fairly well, is showcasing the insane difficulty of putting an in-situ probe inside a tornado. Tornado naturally has fewer instances, but actually demonstrates a wider scope of this difficulty. The Patty team fails due to a bus storm, inadequate positioning on a storm that does produce a tornado, and finally a near failure due to mechanical problems that results in a death. All of these are valid, including the death. But Twister, on the other hand, really leans into all the ways things can go wrong even if the targeted storm does give you a tornado, which itself is a rarity. Out of the 5 tornadoes encountered, Dorothy fails to be deployed on 6 separate occasions. 3 failures of positioning, 1 failure of deployment, and 1 egregious failure of forecasting, demolishing 2 chase vehicles and the first 3 Dorothys in the process. Although the average seasoned tornado researcher would stray away from the unnecessary risks taken in Twister, this kind of success rate is not fiction. It's just the task at hand. But, like Tornado, Twister does get its happy ending. And after surviving roughly 97 minutes of a disaster movie, watching the pummeling of its 3 predecessors, and getting a slight modification, Dorothy 4 completes the task at hand. The results speak for themselves. Upon the canister's entrance, hundreds of meteorological instruments flood the vortex. Rising from ground level to cloud base, these sensors send back what they encounter, and in doing so, Dorothy 4 accomplishes what even the combined efforts of the most advanced equipment and greatest minds in severe storms research of the period couldn't in real life. The complete profiling of a real, natural tornado. A 3-dimensional map to not only the winds, but the pressure gradients, the moisture, and internal temperatures, and if that weren't enough, it keeps doing it. Unlike the more traditional Patty, which allows a tornado to pass over it, recording a single line of data points that, as a result, aren't fixed variables as ideally you'd want one of them to be, Dorothy stays with the tornado. It maps the vortex, and then does it again and again and again, every fraction of a second, showing not merely its structure, but how it grows, stagnates, or diminishes. Enough evolutionary information for even a grad student to accurately predict sudden changes in the vortex's motion several moments before they occur. What Dorothy achieves in the climax of Twister is about as close to computer simulation levels of scrutiny you could get to a real tornado. It's fair to say the resolution of the map could be better, even hundreds of sensors would give a rather sparse picture, and it may be the one thing radar has over it quality-wise, but Dorothy manages to measure several layers of the tornado at several degrees of rotation continuously almost until the tornado's death. If a single radar is a spotlight, this is sunrise. There are still shadows, holes that could be filled, but the product of Dorothy's data is a near complete model of a real tornado. Not a supercomputer approximation, but the real, concrete deal. And of course the best part here is just what Tornado Dorothy gets to sample. While the most complete picture of a tornado in real life at the time of the film's release was obtained from the F4 wind-packing F2 stovepipe that was the Dimmitt tornado, Dorothy does its shtick on a massive mile-wide, 300-mile-per-hour F5 near, 20 miles south of Wakita?
25 miles south of Wakita.
Northeast track? Pond Creek. Yeah, there we go, Pond Creek, I just named it. What exactly was Jan de Bont trying to tell everyone? To be frank, although I don't believe Twister quite conveys the true monumentality of what Dorothy accomplishes, it's fairly well summed up when Bill nonchalantly says,
We could learn more in 30 seconds than I have in the past 30 years.
Because he's not wrong. A dataset like the one Dorothy achieves in Twister, I'd even say could be useful today. But in 1996, when mobile Doppler radar was still in its infancy and the in-situ probe had only barely begun to yield any smidgen of success, it really would have been revolutionary, a massive step forward in confirming the similarities between real tornadoes and physical models, and aiding in the creation of substantially more precise computer simulations. Am I wrong? Am I just so completely enamored by Patty's general simplicity and relative practicality that I'm ignoring how innately impressive Dorothy is? Maybe that's just how it is with these two. Twister is a bigger movie, bigger runtime, bigger cast, and bigger effects, so it's only natural it gets the bigger machine with bigger goals and bigger results. Patty's a fairly decent little device, but there's no contest. The publication war that would ensue between these two if they were real and achieved what they do in their movies would eject Patty to the void of history instantaneously, garnering no more notoriety than it has as the obscure movie prop that it really is. But that's just it. Patty's a prop. And so is Dorothy. Neither of them have ever actually been built to spec and put into a tornado, and similarly, neither the exact events of Twister nor Tornado ever transpired. There is no Dusty, there is no Joe, there is no Bill, there is no Jake Thorne, no Ephraim Thorne, and there is no Dr. Joseph Branson. All of the specifics, obviously, are fiction. Therefore, it's kinda hard to compare these two going purely based off of what they are said to be and what the writers have them do. Patty theoretically could have been written to be an atom bomb, and Dorothy a barrel full of, sodium polyacrylate that is somehow able to absorb enough ambient moisture in a storm to kill its updraft. Both of those are exaggerations, of course. Or at least they're supposed to be. Point is, they can be whatever the story needs them to be, and thus directly comparing them in any other regard beyond entertainment value is pretty moot. So perhaps instead, then, the best course of action would be to compare Patty and Dorothy to what they were written to be based on. And what's particularly great about this is that being products of the mid-90s, the two machines aren't just based on the abstract idea of the in-situ probe, they're both based on a very particular one. A device bold in concept when it was conceived, practically defined tornado research of the 1980s, and then quietly stood aside. A real-life machine that came and went, and for the sake of its two on-screen adaptations, it's about time its story was told, in full. Behold the granddaddy of all of this, trash can number 3, although really this is trash can number 1. An unusual device with a name that spells out its goals perfectly, the Totable Tornado Observatory, and if the resemblance wasn't a dead giveaway of inspiration, those 3 words found their way into Twisters. The sterilely white Toto brandishing its government affiliation, however, seems to be a stark departure from the vibrant Patty and Dorothy. Finally, a device with some quality control, a neat, organized machine rigorously tested by teams of meteorologists before being sent out into the field. It's proper. Deceptively proper. Because despite the appearance, none of what I just said applies to Toto. At its core, Toto is a product of its era. The 1970s were certainly one of the more exciting periods in tornado research. The capabilities to actually track tornadoes were being cemented, and now it was time for big questions and big ideas. The wilder speculations as to tornadic strength and structure were beginning to die down, but outside of motion picture photogrammetry and damage analysis via the brand new Fujita scale, a tornado had never actually been sampled. Most weather stations unfortunate enough to be hit by a tornado didn't live long enough to share much, if anything. The meteorologist's best hope still seemed to be the proven radar, but although NSSL's NexRad prototype was revolutionary in showcasing storm velocity, that was limited to scanning the parent storm, not the tornado itself, and only storms within its range at that. Enter Dr. Alfred J. Bedard Jr., although at this point he's not quite a doctor. The atmospheric researcher out of Boulder, Colorado isn't a meteorologist, he's a physicist and aerospace engineer, but in the late 70s he proposes an idea that will stamp him into history among similar personalities and their own innovatively wacky concepts. Though unlike the Dust Devil research jeep of Dr. Peter Sinclair, the homemade Mach 1 capable tornado rockets of Dr. Sterling Colgate, a man who really deserved his own video, Bedard's device doesn't move. As a matter of fact, it was built to stay as still as possible while enduring the most violent conditions the atmosphere could generate. And it went a little something like this. The Totable Tornado Observatory is a custom-fabricated near 55-gallon aluminum drum welded to a large cylindrical base. It sits inside an iron frame attached to which are trunk handles and casters at the back for transport. Atop the drum sits a large lid with welded handles for lifting it by a pair of planks. Protruding from the lid is the instrument array, but having the instruments exposed to tornadic conditions leaves them vulnerable and liable to be destroyed like the dozens of unsuspecting weather stations before them. Lucky for Toto, Bedard happens to be a wizard in the field of atmospheric instrumentation. For one, he's the mind behind the quad-disc static pressure port, which just so happens to be the single most efficient apparatus for measuring static atmospheric pressure ever designed. Or so I'm told. Bedard knows the run-of-the-mill won't cut it, so the instruments aboard Toto are purpose-built for the conditions they are to encounter, reinforced and significantly sturdier than what is traditional. Of course, this leaves Toto's instruments looking rather peculiar compared to what most people would be used to. For example, an anemometer to most looks like this. Or this. Or this. But which of these things on Toto is supposed to measure wind speed? You might think this one almost resembles an ultrasonic anemometer, but nope, that's the temperature probe. Beneath it is the pressure port, on the opposite side up top is the wind vane for wind direction, and sticking out the middle is the corona discharge probe for measuring electrical fields. That just leaves this thing. This is the anemometer. And while it may look goofy, it's also ingenious. Traditional anemometers have sections that spin, but spin them too fast and the chance of failure increases. How does Bedard fix that? He calls up the man himself, Dr. Ted Fujita, and with him co-designs a non-moving parts anemometer that instead of measuring wind speed directly, measures the extreme dynamic pressure gradient generated by the wind around a sphere. From there, you toss the delta P into this function, solve for U, and you get the wind speed. The stronger the delta P, the stronger the wind speed. It's just fantastic enough to work, and it does. Like the anemometer, all the instruments aboard Toto are optimized in some form or fashion, and all are subsequently wired through the pipes to the data loggers, analog inkless recorders hidden away and protected by the drum. Rounding out the 2-meter-tall machine, the giant batteries also housed in the drum, making for a total weight of 400 pounds, 181 kilograms of aluminum and iron. Heavy enough to stand firm in winds of 100 meters per second as theorized initially by Bedard, yet still light enough to be transported and deployed. Still, you'd hate to have something like that land on your foot. Yeah, that actually happens in a book. Toto, this Toto, the niche barrel thing that 10 minutes ago half of you probably didn't even know existed, made its way into a novel, and its only major contribution is obliterating a man's foot. You can ponder that if you want. After being cobbled together on a very limited budget in early 1980 by Bedard and his colleague Carl Ramsey, its initial trials in the quaint thunder showers of central Colorado were smooth and promising, and no feet were crushed. By 1981, these limited tests of deployment had concluded. Toto had been realized, and it was ready to meet the monsters. Bedard handed Toto off to his correspondent at the University of Oklahoma, the legend himself, Dr. Howard Bluestein. Just how legendary? Well, Michael Crichton went out of his way to name-drop him in the original screenplay for Twister, so that should give you some idea. And in fact, it's actually Bluestein, not Bedard, that is responsible for coming up with Toto's name. According to him, while intoxicated at a cocktail party. Starting out, like its construction, the Toto project was seriously underfunded and the team behind it quite small. It was Bluestein, some colleagues, a handful of OU grad students crammed into a pickup truck to carry Toto, and a parent command vehicle, which was literally just a 1977 Corolla. In May of '81, active field operations finally commenced, and better timing couldn't have been asked for. It was one hell of a year to begin. May 17th would mark Toto's first deployment, a run-in with a non-tornadic supercell near Earlsboro, Oklahoma. A pretty smooth first run, but not with Toto's target. 5 days later, that would not be the case. May 22, 1981 has gone down as one of the most eventful days for tornado field projects in history. A significant outbreak in west central Oklahoma dropping a parade of highly visible and photogenic tornadoes, tracked by several independent research teams, NSSL's Doppler radar in Norman, and captured on TV by helicopter for the first time ever. A very busy day to be sure, but every tornado outbreak has to begin somewhere, and in Toto's case, that's where its day begins as well. It's a tornado that's actually already been in this video twice, but one I'm all too happy to bring up again. Cordell 1981 in tornado terms is quite the historic phrase. A mesmerizingly beautiful trunk that swayed and danced over open fields north of the town, producing some of the single greatest tornado photographs in film ever taken. It's such a hypnotizing sight that all these decades later, it's often forgotten it led such a substantial tornado outbreak. But further forgotten is that it was also pursued by two research teams, without which these incredible images would be locked away in fading memory, and became a hallmark achievement for both. Directed by then grad student Dr. Eric Rasmussen, the Severe Storms Lab collects the first ever isolated audio sample of a tornado during its Sound Chase project. And the second project, well, that's Toto, making Cordell 81 the first ever attempted in-situ deployment on a tornado. Attempted deployment, however, is the accurate description. In the late afternoon, Bluestein and his team raced northward out of the town on an intercept course. Stopping along a bend in Highway 183 to document the tornado, he sends Toto further ahead to catch the twister. As the truck approaches the path, though, it becomes abundantly clear that the tornado is simply moving too fast for a safe setup. Stopping a short stroll ahead of Rasmussen's team, Toto is nonetheless unloaded and switched on to record the environment around the tornado. It wasn't for nothing. Moments after setup, the base of the funnel rapidly surged forward, followed by an 81-mile-per-hour gust that sent dust careening across the highway and the chasers for their vehicles. In the chaos, Toto stood firm and managed to document in 1981 the still poorly understood phenomenon that was a rear flank downdraft. It may not have been what the team was specifically after, but it still turned out to be a dataset worthy of analysis, one garnered from what many did and still describe as the encounter of a lifetime. The tornado itself persisted for only a few minutes more before ending southeast of the town of Bessie, taking its shroud of dust and ominous roar with it. With new and usable data collected, the deployment at Cordell proved to be a mildly successful first tornadic encounter for Toto. The kind of trial run that's just good enough to pack up and go home satisfied with. In the midst of a tornado outbreak, though, Bluestein's team is not satisfied with simply being satisfied. Mild success, yeah, but the barrel was built to go inside a twister. Toto still had yet to do that, and in its waning hours, May 22nd had one final show. Less than a mile north of the town of Binger, another tornado has developed. This one isn't a benign trunk. It's huge, over 3/4 of a mile wide. The next rad at NSSL 50 miles away is clocking winds aloft at over 200 miles per hour. At conception, the tornado lurks behind a massive dust sheath encircling the base of the mesocyclone, but eventually emerges from the haze as a sharply pronounced wedge, lumbering over the plains and oil fields, tossing drums larger than cars, and demolishing the unlucky farmhouses it encounters. It's a hell of a show, a high-end F4, a tornado so menacing that years later the Storm Prediction Center chooses to use it as the ambassador for high risks. And while everyone else is doing their best to keep their distance from it, there's Toto, patiently waiting along a desolate stretch of Highway 37 amidst the approaching monster. This isn't a movie. This is the real-life grandeur that movies compete with. For the first time ever, Dr. Beddard's machine is in perfect position to be impacted, and the Binger tornado's steady track is going to yield the intercept to end all others. Toto's story is fascinating. It's one of innovation and at its core is very, very adventurous. And that makes sense. 2 movies are based on it. But what you have to understand about the story of Toto is that what it isn't is a story of success. 1982 picked up almost exactly where 1981 left off. On May 11th, a large F-3 plows over Altus Air Force Base in southwestern Oklahoma. Initially a stout wedge, it shrinks slightly and weakens to F2 strength, but that doesn't hinder it from slicing the nose of a C-5 Galaxy in half with the wing of another C-5. To think any machine would have the audacity to sit in the path of a giant that can effortlessly push around some of the world's largest aircraft. But, once again, there's Toto, patiently waiting in said path. Waiting, 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 but before Toto could wait anymore, the tornado vanishes. And then, almost mockingly, the storm produces another large F-3 moving away to the northwest, practically in the opposite direction. If Cordell was a case of it can only get better from here, and Binger a case of we'll get him next time, Altus was just plain shit. And there were to be more where that came from. May 18th, 1982, a vehicle breakdown the previous day causes the chase team to miss the significant tornado outbreak near Pampa, Texas. No, not that one. June 14th, 1982, exceptionally poor conditions around a supercell near Spearman, Texas prevent deployment on the F2 it produces. No, not that one. May 20th, 1983, the team fails to achieve proper positioning on a pair of tornadoes near Plainview, Texas, in part due to poor visibility. Out of over 2,700 reported tornadoes for the seasons of 1981, 82, and 83, Toto came within visual range of a grand total of 7. And after that first eventful year, it never even got close. Even for the greatest of tornado researchers, the task at hand is exceptionally hard. And worse yet, 1983 was somehow going to make it even harder. In March, prior to the chase season, Toto was driven down to Texas A&M University, whereupon it was to encounter severe weather conditions. Not in a storm, though, in a wind tunnel. In contrast to its Colorado tests, this wasn't a handful of sporadic foothill downdrafts. This was a machine that could generate tornado force winds and ultimately provide a much more accurate regime for Toto's limits. What it revealed was that Toto could actually remain stable in winds of 100 meters per second, as initially thought, if it was bolted to the fore. If not, Toto would tip over in winds as low as 45 meters per second. That is 100, just 100 miles per hour. Failure after failure, diminishing confidence that Toto could be deployed into a tornado, that's one thing. But to find out Toto may not even survive a successful deployment on a moderately strong F1, that sealed the deal. Bluestein gave the barrel one more shot in May 20th, one final failure, after which he officially threw in the towel to pursue other, more promising projects. After 3 years, for him, his team, and OU, Toto was nothing but a mounting headache. And they were done with it. But that isn't the end of Toto. In early 1982, when optimism for the project was still high, the OU team found themselves with a bit more funding than in 1981, as well as a partnership with the NSSL. While this didn't directly save it from failure, it did mean the project as a whole still had a thin, but government-backed lifeline. And with the funding for it already there, you might as well see it through. After Bluestein's departure, it was transferred to NSSL in full, and responsibility for Toto fell to Dr. Lou Wicker of tornado simulation fame, although he's also a grad student at this point. Wicker had previously worked with Bluestein on his team, and in fact it was his personal car that served as the team's command vehicle. Despite occasionally being followed by the NSSL's mobile lab or TV crews feeding public intrigue, Wicker's team isn't any larger than Bluestein's was. It's him, veteran researcher Bob Davies-Jones, some of their NSSL colleagues, and their 2 vehicles, a Chevy Suburban and a Dodge Ram. From 1984 onward, this was to be the backing of Toto, and while the doubt of Toto's effectiveness still circled in the air, Wicker maintained persistence. And then suddenly, completely out of the blue, it happened. In April of 1985, surrounded by the trees of southern Oklahoma, after 3 years of nothing, the persistence paid off. Toto was impacted. Its streak of missed tornadoes was finally toppled. And you have no idea how poor a choice of word that is.
And this is what we find. Toto knocked over on its side. Instruments inside confirm that for the first time, Toto has been hit by a small tornado.
Maybe it was a good thing Binger turned. Yeah, the wind blew it over. Or it got hit with a branch, it's difficult to say. Bottom line is, exactly what anyone after 1983 would have expected to happen, happened. It didn't hold up. And what was the culprit? Some big monster wedge? A drill bit, perhaps? No, it was this, the April 29th, 1985 Ardmore, Oklahoma F2. A tornado that was still in its developing stage upon impacting Toto, and 40 years later is still only notable for knocking Toto over. Over 5 years of use, this was its one and only tornado intercept. Some random Oklahoma cone, and the Totable Tornado Observatory couldn't handle it. Yet, despite this interesting episode at Ardmore, NSSL was steadfast in its continued use of Toto for the rest of 1985 and well into 1986, to a bit of public fanfare but predictably little actual eventfulness. If it wasn't evident in 83 or 85, it was now blatantly obvious the project was falling apart. The future of Dr. Bedard's device wasn't looking great, but somehow Toto itself was beginning to look even worse. Between 1980 and 1986, Toto had evolved from its original uncluttered appearance. Various add-ons and tweaks were made, the addition of a control box, support cables for the instrument pipes, and a new set of casters by 1983. But come 1986, it had become insane, and Toto had evolved into this gaudy monstrosity. Orange reflectors taped to the frame, a new box taped to the lid, tape taped to the lid, and what is that? What is that? Is that a... Oh, I see. It's a speed indicator F420, a mechanical anemometer that can apparently only accurately measure wind speeds up to just over 100 miles per hour. That's not meant to go inside a tornado. And the truth is, after 1985, neither was Toto. The powers that be had demoted Toto from the Totable Tornado Observatory to the Totable Thunderstorm Observatory. It wasn't actually called that, I'm calling it that. Toto had been transformed into a portable weather station to be deployed in strictly non-tornadic conditions. A supercell, maybe, but inside the tornado? Out of the question. Though after demonstrating it couldn't handle the winds of even a weak twister, let alone a violent one, this is all NSSL could feasibly get it to do. But hey, if that's the case, at least a good use was found for it, something Toto could actually practically accomplish, serving as a post of instruments carried by a vehicle that could go where and when it was needed to make measurements on a particular part of a storm. But wait, that's just the mobile mesonet. Except those instruments are mounted to the car, don't have to be deployed, you don't have to stop anywhere, and you don't have to lug about a quarter-ton drum. So why'd they keep Toto around? They didn't. Toto was retired in 1987 after its usefulness was, shall we say, supplemented. By 1990, it was almost a relic, and after a decade, our two movies had sprung up. For a while, it sat in a NOAA office in Maryland before being moved to its current home at the National Weather Center in Norman. Today, it sits around doing nothing, except getting passed by undergrads on their way to get a chicken sandwich, but naturally it does so sitting next to the infinitely more famous movie prop it helped inspire. With no more alternate uses and no more government funding, that is the end of the story of Toto. The tale of a bold idea that was brutally beaten over the head by reality and pinballed around in a stubborn hope it would work. Of course, the in-situ probe wasn't a lost cause, and Toto did pave the way for the future of it, but that doesn't make it any less depressing that Toto itself, the genesis of all of it, literally fell flat on its face. It should have been groundbreaking, not ground-kissing. So how about this? What if in the same stubborn spirit that kept Toto going all those years, just for the hell of it, as a little uplift of its legacy, we were to try and make Toto work? What if we were to take inventory of all the flaws that in hindsight hindered it, rework it a bit, and implement aspects of other in-situ probes that found actual success in the years after it? Well, if we're just spitballing, I can tell you right off the bat the first thing I would knock down is Toto's weight. 400 pounds, 181 kilograms, and still a weak tornado could put it on its back. Making it any heavier would just be an exercise in futility. Size is another thing. Not only would reducing the size bring its density back up, but it would also just make it inherently more ergonomic. Batteries became smaller, and by the mid-80s, Toto had replaced its analog recorders with compact digital ones, so making it smaller is absolutely possible. We could also then improve its aerodynamics a bit by removing the mast and putting the instruments inside an enclosure, something that innumerable in-situ designs after Toto did with very positive results, and that also means the instruments wouldn't have to be as hardened or specialized. Though increased aerodynamics alone isn't going to keep Toto planted, we would need something more. Though with that, we don't need to speculate. In his 1982 report on Toto, Bedard had suggested that in the event Toto was not as stable as it was thought to be, either negative lift airfoils or anchoring spikes could be implemented to fix this. He preferred the airfoils, but considering no tornado intercept machine has ever been fitted with wings to keep it planted, I would go with the more proven option B. And it sounds like he really only disliked the spikes because of how long it would take to manually hammer them into the ground. There are certainly faster methods out there that we could use. Finally, because it's a great high-vis color and the choice livery for just about every in-situ probe out there, we could paint it orange. And yeah, guess what we just built?
Saved one life, then our efforts would have been worthwhile.
I guess you could say Dr. B's machine became Dr. B's machine. Yeah, go figure, Patty is an adaptation of Toto, but the beauty lies in the fact that there's actually a dual meaning there. Patty is Toto adapted for the screen, yes, but simultaneously it also manages to be Toto adapted for the purpose it failed to accomplish. Whether it be dumb luck or coincidence or prop master Robert Janecka getting an A+ on his homework, Patty is a legitimate attempt at improving that design from '79. You can run down the list again. The weight and size reduction, the enclosed instruments, and even the seemingly outlandish anchoring system is rooted in official concepts specifically for Toto. Patty not only utilizes the inspiration, but actively tries to fix it, to bring it in relatively similar form and function from the 1980s to the 1990s. Within the context of the decade, intentional or not, that's an impressive and commendable display of authenticity, especially from a B-movie action prop of all things. Patty isn't real. It was not an actual project that required these fixes. It wasn't detrimental to the movie or the story that it be this way, and yet it was. It is. All the same. So, if that's what Patty is, and that's what Toto was, where does that leave us in the competition? Patty may be a prudent on-screen version of Toto, but what of Dorothy? Considering all that Dorothy is in the movie, is being a slightly better Toto really enough to save Patty from being another one of Tornado's inferiorities to Twister? Dorothy, a machine equivalent to an entire institution's worth of instruments, vehicles, and personnel, and we're supposed to say this is better. That's a stretch, right? Patty may be practical, if only barely, but Dorothy is incredible. In terms of data collection, it's a machine so far beyond any other, real or fiction. Its scope is immense. It's a near finality of Tornado research. It's utterly perfect. It is... It's... And thus we return to Stonehenge. 8 years after Bruce Morgan first proposed the idea, Hoadley, in all his comedic wisdom, gifted everyone with the answer. It's a caricature. Let's get this out of the way because it's honestly less important overall. The glaring question on some of your minds. Does Dorothy, as a concept, work? The short answer is no. In all but the most impossibly ideal scenarios, no, and we don't actually have to build Dorothy to spec to understand that. The long answer, well, I've been assured in good faith that that is its own hour-long video on the complexity and nuance of tornado vortex dynamics. That is something I'm not going to make. More adept minds can do that. The reason Dorothy works in Twister is a combination of movie trickery, tornadoes with unnaturally strong updrafts, and the fact that it actually doesn't end up working as it's said to even in the movie. This all, however, is honestly irrelevant. The reason Patty is superior to Dorothy genuinely has very little to do with whether or not Dorothy would functionally fail in real life. Because if Toto failed, then there's absolutely a chance Patty could fail as well. The reason Dorothy falls second is because of what it's trying to be and how it goes about it. It can be pretty well summed up in the relationship these two machines have with their inspiration. Patty tries to be a better Toto, while Dorothy tries to be more than Toto. Neither would be a terrible sentiment if they were following anything other than Toto. And in Dorothy's quest to innovate, it completely ignores any of the lessons that should be and were learned from it. Did I mention Dorothy is massive? It's giant. It's a huge device, almost comically so when compared to anything else like it. From a non-entertainment perspective, it's gaudy, littered in exposed instruments far below the caliber of Toto and strung with other fixtures that harken back to '86 and Toto's decay. It's clumsy, awkward, difficult to handle, and while like most other immediate post-Toto in-situ probes, it has attempted to reduce its weight, it doesn't compensate for this in any way. Now, credit where credit is due, Twister directly addresses this. Dorothy is horrifically unstable for most of the movie, has no chance at even releasing its sensors because of, and is eventually forced to compensate. Not with cool spikes, with an equally cool dodge and some ratchet straps. But that's just another point to the movie at the expense of the machine. And just with Patty how it was not a necessity it be designed in the way it was, Dorothy's canister didn't need to be like this either. We know this because we actually have two distinct examples of Dorothy-esque devices that are slightly better in this regard. It's really only half true that Dorothy is based on Toto, as it's technically based on the device of Michael Crichton's Twister, which the movie itself is an interpretation of, not a direct copy. Although functioning almost identically to Dorothy, the devices in the screenplay are significantly smaller, small enough to be carried by one person, and the only notable external features are a few protruding antennas. That's quite the contrast to what we got in the movie. The second example, however, is a bit more ironic, because it's Dorothy. The last Dorothy. Dorothy 5 is Twister's attempt at showcasing an improvement on the original design, and while it's not as good an example of this as Crichton's machine, it's still an example. It's smaller, lighter, and a tad more streamlined than the original 4, and the doctrine of its use has at least somewhat followed the lessons learned in the first movie, all things that apparently prop master Greg Gonzalez took into consideration when designing it. These two variations on Dorothy may fall behind in the interesting movie prop department, but it's undeniable they are steps in a better direction machine-wise, more in line with how tornado probes actually evolved after Toto, even if ultimately they still carry the same overarching and damning flaw. You can give them that, at least, because they could have gone the other direction. What? You thought I was going to go this whole time without mentioning the top-heavy travesty that is Dot 3? The tin can that opens up like f***ing Unicron to reveal a bunch of cubes? A machine that's presented as superior to Dorothy, yet would be more unstable, more awkward to use, and would likely have an even lower chance of success? Nice PhD, Jonas. Did you get it from your daycare center? So what does all this really mean for Dorothy? Why call it a caricature? Why compare it to a David Hoadley sketch? Boil it down to the truth, Dorothy isn't so much a machine as it is an idle pile of references. What does a tornado probe look like? Well, it looks like this, of course, but later on it looked like this, so it must have been upgraded. It has instruments on poles, so we'll need those. It has a spinning anemometer, so we'll put 2. It's got reflectors all over it, so we'll have lights. Tornado video is all the rage, so we best have some cameras. Dorothy is a compendium of all the things people think a device for tornado research should have, but without any rhyme or reason as to why they're there. It simply has them, to be everything. And I really do mean everything. Hey, look, it's that thing we've come back to. By 1996, it had become readily apparent that moving forward, what was going to provide the most important data on tornadoes was indeed the mobile Doppler radar. So in true fashion, Dorothy has its very own radar. How do we know this? Because it's a very particular one. Dorothy's radar is modeled off the portable X-band Doppler radar developed by Los Alamos in the mid-1980s. It's one of the projects Howie Bluestein took on after Toto, and with it essentially paved the way for future mobile radar platforms. That should be one of the best references in a tornado movie ever. And it would be, if it wasn't bolted to Dorothy. Considering all the issues this radar presents, and I don't just mean nitpicky technical details, there are some really puzzling realizations to be had with this radar that make it, in the context of the movie, not only redundant, but expensively useless. Considering that, why? Why must it be on the back of Dorothy? What's the thought process? To look the part? To look cool? To be meteorological? Fair enough. Seriously, fair enough. That's not an invalid reason. There's nothing wrong with looking cool in a movie. But in the end, it's impossible to say it's anything more than that, which just serves to sour the cool reference it's trying to be. Compare that to Patty, whose most complex gadget is its ceilometer. It's not a Doppler weather radar, it's a laser that tells you distance to clouds, a slightly more complex version of something that you could buy at Home Depot. It's not grand, it's not generally associated with groundbreaking tornado research, and yet it's still unique. It's still innovative, it's still cool, and it does so while being a passing remark, without having to be an obvious reference, without immediately jumping to we need to have a radar on our machine because radar is the greatest tool for tornado research. Genuinely, Dorothy is such a complete compendium of these poorly installed references that the one thing it seems to not try and cram into itself would be Bluestein's third project for the 1980s. In-field weather ballooning. You know, radio sondes. Small airborne sensors that fly up through the air transmitting back a plethora of information on the environment they encounter. And unsurprisingly, this theme isn't just emblematic of Dorothy, but Twister as a whole. You'll find references to some of the most important aspects of 20th century storm chasing littered throughout the movie. Not as integrity to the story, but again just as loosely placed nods. Twister's massive blockbuster budget affords it the ability to do this, to conglomerate decades of storm chasing into this exciting fantasy world and then fill it with crazy personalities. It's awesome and fun, yeah, but there are no false illusions that it feels real. This is funny because its sequel is similar in this regard, but does feel very real. But that's only because a large portion of modern amateur storm chasing has been directly influenced by Twister. Its own alteration of the world as a movie made its sequel more accurate by consequence. Now, compare that to Tornado. It doesn't have the resources to accomplish nearly as much as Twister. Because of this, it's forced into a box of limits. Its cast is tighter, its drama smaller, its scope is narrower, its fanfare quieter. Limited props, limited vehicles, limited action. While this drags it down significantly as a movie, it gives it the one quality Twister lacks. It makes it more real for the era it inhabits. This isn't to say it has a documentary quality to it, and there are certainly the unreal parts of the film, but its stripped-down, bare-bones style is exactly what you find with the real-world projects it was inspired by, especially Toto. Twister tries to pull this off by styling everything with rust, so appropriately it ends up just feeling like a coat of paint. But with Tornado, the essence of early tornado field research, a near constant state of underfunded, unpolished endeavor, is quite literally synonymous with its very own production. That is an unintended thoroughness you objectively cannot buy. Which of these two is superior? Well, you know my opinion. But with that being said, which of these two is superior? Well, don't get it twisted. Ugh, the script sucks. Twister is still, without a doubt, the superior movie. It's a better piece of entertainment, its technical effects are amazing, and it 100% elicits more investment in its story. I've given Dorothy quite the thrashing, but I would be lying if I were to say it isn't still a fun machine, visually interesting and one that fits very, very well into the atmosphere and energy of its movie, regardless of whether or not it's completely logical. That's the essence of a good movie prop, and that shouldn't be surprising considering Dorothy is the work of John Zemansky, whose resume as prop master includes an amazing list of films, with a certain volcano movie included. In that light, as a movie prop, Dorothy is absolutely deserving of its own praise. Thus, I think it's more than fair to point out that despite its nonsense, Dorothy isn't disconnected from reality completely. In 1987, after the retirement of Toto, NSSL and OU adopted a new in-situ device, designed by atmospheric instrument engineer Dr. Fred Brock, which he dubbed the Turtle. This was the true successor to Toto. It was a dense, squat, dome-shaped probe with an enclosed instrument array for measuring temperature and pressure. Sound familiar? Well, get this. It was silver, small, significantly smaller than even Patty, and there were several of them. During deployment, the turtles acted as a line or network of probes as opposed to a point covering a much larger area. By deploying more than just a single probe, the chance of an impact went up significantly, and the ability to measure a tornado at different locations and periods of its life finally came to fruition. This in-situ network methodology, as opposed to a single large device, is what ultimately persisted in professional fields, and the most successful tornado probes since, to varying extent, have all followed this path. In reality, the follow-up to Toto was neither exactly Patty nor Dorothy, it was somewhere in between the two. I maintain significantly closer to one, but in between all the same. And perhaps in a way that's true of their movies as well. Maybe being full of explosions really is the mark of excellence here. Nevertheless, I think it's safe to say the obscure prop from a movie no one remembers from a genre people care less and less about, something that could have just followed the industry format of borrowing everything from its counterpart, takes away quite the compliment from all this. Patty itself may be the last thing anyone would ever think about when judging Tornado as a movie, and that's fair. After all, there are other and certainly more important qualities in a film to judge, and Tornado has both its lows and its highs. Objectively, more of the former, but it's undeniable that among the latter, the portable analyzer of technical tornado information, the machine, ended up being one of its highest. So good job, Patty. You and your movie, I think you did all right.
And you really think the bolts will hold her down, huh?
Well, 90%.
We put her up inside a tornado. She opens and releases hundreds of these sensors that measure all the parts of the tornado simultaneously.
Their goal, to track down a tornado and put a portable weather station directly in its path. Built to withstand violent weather, it can sense and record what no human can approach without real danger. The Toto Tornado Observatory, affectionately nicknamed Toto.
Did you see my pro?